physical stores capture people's attention and keep them for as long as possible, but online stores, they have to capture people's attention and keep them for as long as possible as well, but in a different way. And also it's about tracking those average transaction values, because the big retailers, they spend a lot of time obsessing about that.
Behind the scenes of shopping.
Why we buy what we buy.
Exactly, yeah. When you walk into a shop, apparently most people turn right.
Yes, I've heard the same thing.
Yeah, so they'll put the thing that they are most likely to buy on the right. So all of their bestsellers on the right, or they'll just consider the journey that you're going to go on around the store, assuming you're going to go right.
Yes.
So obviously I'm a rebel. I try and go left to be different. The other reason why they would put tables in is because you are more likely to buy something once you pick it up.
Oh, really? So they're calling it this trust recession. So less and less trust. Everything that's customer facing, you have to make sure that, do you have reviews? Do you have genuine looking reviews? People sometimes worry, retailers sometimes worry if they get a bad review, but actually what they don't realise is that it helps with this proof that they're human. Elizabeth, welcome, episode 4.
Welcome back to the Shopping Forecast.
So tell me, what have you been buying this week?
This week I bought some hydrangea food.
Okay.
I feel really sad for my hydrangeas.
Emotionally attached to plants. I get it. So I'm the same way.
Yes. I had some hydrangeas. First of all, it was my grandma's favourite flower, so they always remind me of her.
Oh.
And in my old house, I had this really evil neighbour.
Yes, I remember you told me about this.
Actually, I'm not going to mention her name. She doesn't deserve it. And Kieran, my boyfriend Kieran, his mum bought us a hydrangea. We planted it in the front garden, and we found out that Sue had had ripped it out of the ground, then put it back. So all the roots were broken, but it looked like it was slowly dying. Creepy, frightening. We moved house because she frightened the life out of me. So I thought, I'm going to dedicate my whole back garden to my grandma. I'm going to put hydrangeas everywhere. But I have these huge trees in the back garden that protect our house from the railway, like the noise from it. And what I didn't realise is that trees are the priority for water suction. So if it rains or anything, first of all, there's not that much rain that goes on the soil. And second of all, if whatever rain does go on, the trees get it.
Yeah.
So we moved all of them to the front, and I feel like they've been traumatized a little bit.
Right.
Again. The trauma hydrangea story. And so I've put them at the front, but they're just not growing. They're like 2 years old and they're still quite small. And I think I've been watering them loads. Actually, Kieran's been watering them loads. And Smokey. Smokey loves it when the hose comes out, my dog. And I thought, I'm going to give it some food and see if it makes a difference, because it's been boiling. Like, we even went to the park yesterday and all of the grass, there's no green anywhere anymore.
Brown.
Yeah, it's like some sort of post-apocalyptic world. So, they're still tiny. I'm hoping some plant food might revive them and make them bigger.
Well, I have to say, last year, so my obsession in my garden is my roses, which I love to obsess over and tinker with. And last year I only got one bloom of roses, and then I realised that I wasn't feeding them, and this year I fed them a lot, and I have to say it's been incredible.
Are they bigger or just more flowers?
Bigger.
Both. Okay.
I think you're going to be happy. I'm sure everyone is going to be tuning in.
Yeah, I'm sure you're all on the edge of your seat for next year's episode.
The hydrangea update.
Yeah. And what about you? What have you bought?
Well, while I was on holiday, I bought some lemon-shaped soaps.
Oh, cute.
From a town called Limone, which literally translates as lemon. So, in fact, it made me laugh because on the ferry schedule, they had the Italian and then the English, and it literally said, Desenzano at this time, Limone this time, and then on the English one, it said Desenzano and lemon. They just put the whole thing through Google Translate.
Yeah.
But I definitely was thinking, when I got them home, I was like, why did I buy lemon-shaped soaps? Now, fun fact, I've forgotten about this, but when I was a teenager, I actually had quite a large collection of fruit-shaped soaps.
Me too. From the body shop.
Really?
Yeah. Who 100%.
And I used to display them in my room and I used to dust them. I mean, I was thinking like, that seems like this is before the internet.
No,
really.
If we were friends when we were like 8, we would have been friends.
Yeah. But then it made me think, and I think we should delve into this in another episode, but there's something about when you're on holiday, and I was in a town that was called Limoni. Everything was lemon themed. All the street signs were lemon themed. There were lemon themed shops. And so, of course, I ended up buying lemon soaps. But then you get them home and you're like, why did I do that? And it's kind of reminded me of
we don't even use bars of soap.
Exactly. And it's like when I went to Marrakesh, I ended up buying this enamelled dish from the souks, and then I got home and again I was like, this doesn't go with anything in the house. So there's definitely, and I have looked it up, and there's a couple of different things. There's environmental priming, where you get primed by your environment to buy certain things. So we think that our taste is very fixed, but it's actually quite changeable, malleable depending on where we are and who we're with.
Yeah.
So I think we should do a deep dive into that, into why you buy stuff on holiday. But that was what I bought this week.
That reminds me as well, I just got back from Portugal for my brother's wedding, and we go to the supermarket for this really tasty peri-peri chicken.
Yeah.
And I said, I want chili and lemon. But there was a huge language barrier. And Kieran was like, try saying it in Portuguese. And I was the lemon. He got the chili bit, but it was the lemon bit he wasn't getting. He was like, what is it in Portuguese? I was like, lemon. Lemon is just the same all everywhere, is it not? Anyway, we had no lemon on our chicken. It tasted of nothing. So
Google Translate is your friend.
Yeah.
So, what are we talking about this week? What's your theme for the week?
My theme of the week.
Story.
Because sometimes what we like to do is talk about something that's topical and that's happening, but other times we just want to talk about cool, interesting things behind the scenes of shopping.
Why we buy what we buy.
Exactly. Yeah, it's in the shopping title of why we buy what we buy. And what I want to delve into is why we buy so much sometimes, and why certain stores are more enticing than others. So I can't remember if I've spoken before about how much I hate H&M's update of their shop fit, because everything is grey, the lighting is horrible, the walls are grey, the floor is grey, everything's ugly, and it makes your body look grey, and therefore nothing looks appealing. And so that's one thing I do not like H&M store fits. Tell me if you're the same. But what I love is, I think I started learning about this at uni, and then I've never really forgotten about it, is visual merchandising and the way stores are laid out.
It's amazing.
Through all your senses. So one thing I learned, I don't know if this is true or not, but when you walk into a shop, apparently most people turn right.
Yes, I've heard the same thing.
Yeah, so they'll put the thing that they are most likely to buy on the right. So all of their bestsellers on the right, or they'll just consider the journey that you're going to go on around the store, assuming you're going to go right.
Yes.
So obviously I'm a rebel. I try and go left just to be different. But if you are going to go on a journey around a store, they'll put things in your way. So huge tables. I feel like Gap always did this quite well. Where they would put massive tables out to almost like halt you from just walking in and out. You have to go around things and look at things on your way. The other reason why they would put tables in is because you are more likely to buy something once you pick it up.
Oh, really?
So it's the same with Primark as well. They put everything out on tables, but I think they actually do that for a different reason, which I'll say in a minute, is because if it's hanging, you can just touch it, but it's not yours. You almost have to take the hanger off the rail and then it's yours.
Yes.
Whereas if something's folded, as soon as you pick it up, you go, oh, that's nice. And then you have to physically let it go again. And so even though it's a bit of a nightmare for the staff to have so many things folded, because again, if you've ever been into a Primark, all the staff do is refold everything. But it must be more cost effective to do that than to put everything on hanger. I think also with Primark, the reason they do it is because it's cheaper to ship things without hanger.
Right, yes.
And have everything folded. Because what you'll see if you go into Primark is that sometimes you will see almost like a hanger imprint on the back of a t-shirt.
Oh, right.
So they've literally packed it in the hanger, in the box from India or China or Portugal, wherever it's come from. But it's more expensive to do that because you're shipping the cost of the hanger.
Yes.
They only do that otherwise the cost comes from the person in store putting it on a hanger.
Yes.
So the cost is going to be somewhere, and they've obviously worked out that is cheaper to ship the hanger itself.
I'm surprised you'd ever ship a T-shirt hung, because when I worked in clothing, a lot of the time we would just ship everything flat packed that was knit jersey. Yeah. And the only things that they shipped, they would actually, I worked for people like Austin Reed, so suiting, or Coast, so lots of occasion dresses.
Yeah.
And they would ship everything on these bars inside the containers. So they would have to actually put bars inside a container and then just ship it all on hangers.
Yeah.
But that was extra cost. You would never do that if you could get away with it. You would always try and ship things flat packed. And I remember one time they shipped it, some supplier, they didn't use bars, they just used string, and the string broke in transit. No. So they opened the container and there were just thousands of garments piled on the floor.
Oh dear. Nightmare.
Yeah. That took a long time. It's a long time to sort out, and a lot of money.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe a lot of woven things that would crease if they were folded, so they come hanging. I don't know. Maybe we'll go into Primark one day and do a live episode and what's come hung and what's come folded. But another way they try and slow you down is through music. So a bar, Abercrombie. I think it would be quite rare that you find somewhere like blasting out house music, for example, because it would quite literally make you go faster. So the same with driving, isn't it? If you listen to fast music, you're more likely to drive faster. So definitely in supermarkets, if any music is being played, it's often quite at a slow tempo to keep you relaxed, keep you in store for as long as possible.
Dwell time, right? It's all about dwell time.
Yes, yeah. And then if we are looking at supermarkets as well, well, actually, no, there's more I want to say. What have you ever gone into John Lewis on Oxford Circus, let's say, and you go up the stairs or you go up the escalator, but the escalator right next to you, is it not also going up?
Yes.
It's going back down again. And you go, why have they, I just want to keep going up and up and up.
Yeah.
But they want you to go up, around the shop floor, up again, around the shop floor again, up again. So even though you find it very frustrating, it's much more likely that you're going to get distracted on your way and pick something else up along the way. Is the other reason why all of the changing rooms are at the back of the store, because they want you to pick up as much product on the way to the changing room. I would actually go as far to say as they hide the changing rooms in most stores. You can't find them. And also the tills are at the back as well, because again, they want you to pick up as much stuff as possible on the way to the till.
Yes.
Or the impulse purchases around the till. I think H&M actually do this really well. They have those big buckets, don't they, by the till with like hairbands and fun little trinkets. Yeah, Primark are so good at it. They'll have the lip balms and things. But there was a law that was brought in recently, wasn't there, that you can't sell junk food at tills anymore.
Yes. They changed that at supermarkets, so they didn't want the items right by the till to be those kind of impulse pick up. Yeah, and I remember when I worked at Paper Chase, this was a huge debate between the teams, because everybody wanted to have their products on the tills.
Oh, of course.
So it had to be agreed, because they didn't have the full queue barriers. So those big long queue barriers that they have in Primark and H&M with all those big buckets. Not all stores have those. Some of them just have a couple of things on the till. But it was like this big debate. Was it going to be the pens? Or was it going to be the tape dispensers?
Yeah.
So it would be like a big kind of every team had to kind of pitch for the add-ons on the till.
Oh, and did you see an uplift on it?
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. But also it was about tracking those average transaction values, because the big retailers, they spend a lot of time obsessing about that average transaction value, how much each individual person's spending on average, and then also units per transaction. So they would always try and get it, like eke up that units per transaction, because if you think about everybody in Primark picking up a pack of scrunchies or socks, they always do socks, batteries, chewing gum, whatever it might be, so just something that is
tote bags,
that if that adds an extra £1, if that's one extra £1 on every single transaction, that's a huge impact.
I think Tiger do it as well quite well. They'll have like a wall of tote bags behind the till. And it's interesting actually, Tiger, H&M and Primark are all really low cost stores, so they're trying to boost that average order value as much as possible.
Yeah, well, Tiger, you can't just nip in and out of Tiger, right?
That's another one.
The Flying Tiger's the ultimate example of you have to snake all the way around, and it's like, I remember someone's saying this about like a home, like B&M or something like that, it's like, what do you need from the store? Like, no, that's not how it works. The store tells me what I need. I feel like Flying Tiger's a bit like that. Like you start off going, I don't really need anything. And then you go, oh, this is all
Aldi middle aisle.
Yeah.
And so I have heard as well, which does make sense. If you are on a budget, all you need to do is go round the lap of the supermarket, around the outer edge, because on the outer edge, you'll find everything that you need. But then as soon as you start going further in is where all the things you don't need are.
Right.
And if I think about my local Aldi, I would definitely say that is true. But even in Tesco and Sainsbury's, they'll put all of the deodorants and things like bang in the middle. And they'll put, fruit and veg, milk, cheese, meat all around the edges. Or like Morrison's, for example, they'll have the fish counter and the meat counter. And so you would actually be able to get everything you on a basic budget that you need all the way around the edge.
Well, it's a lot of the time it's all of the like fresh foods or the non-processed foods.
Yes.
Around the outside, and then the middle aisles are
full of shit. Yeah. And then if you are going to think about the supermarket as well, it's slightly different because the tills are always at the front. So you have to do a full lap to be able to go in and out again. But end aisles come at a premium. So if you're in Tesco and you look for a pizza that's on offer, like a Pizza Express pizza is on offer this week, they will probably put that on the end aisle. But Pizza Express have paid to be on that end aisle because they know that, I don't know, do people linger on the aisle ends more, or is there like less choice on the end of the aisle?
I think it's about visibility, because I often think that, like, let's say I was going to say cheese. I don't actually eat cheese, but like, for the family, I need cheese. I feel like you kind of like walking along and then you see the whole cheese aisle, but then there'll be a special offer on the end. And you think, oh, well, I could just grab that.
Yeah. And I also guess if you don't go up and down every aisle, but you would go past every end.
Yes, because it's through the middle of the store, and the way they do it from the way you have to go from the entrance to the tills, you almost have to walk.
Yes.
Through the middle.
And they will also put higher margin products at eye level as well. So McVitie's biscuits, let's say, would pay to be at eye level, and therefore Tesco owned biscuits would be further down, and like all of the value biscuits might be at the bottom.
Eye level is bi level.
Yes. I've had that. And when I was working at Next, he would always say that. But it is true, isn't it? Because especially if you've got your headphones in or you're on the phone and you're in a rush, you're not going up and down, are you? You're just literally looking at what's there. I'm always tempted to do this whole other episode on Aldi as well about like why it's so cheap, because there's less options, but we'll save that for another day, I think. And then they're just going back to the supermarkets as well. This is slightly different, but I read years ago about how cereal boxes, all of the characters, so say that little monkey on the Cocoa Pops, his eyes look down at children.
Oh.
So when the children are looking up, they're looking into the character's eyes of the cereal box, which makes them be like, Mum, I want the Cocoa Pops. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, because I'd almost have to like get on my hands and knees in the supermarket to figure out if it's true. But yeah, there is a whole maths and science and geography lesson inside a supermarket, inside a store. And I just think it is so interesting how they kind of capture you and keep you in there for as long as possible and make you buy as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think that what you're saying about the kids is that pester power, they call it, kids persuading their parents. And I think that was why wasn't that related to why they took the sugary snacks off the checkouts? Yes. Because the kids would be like, Mom, can I have a
because they're bored and they're stood staring at it for like a prolonged amount of time. Yes. Whereas if you're in an aisle, you can just be like, come on. So yeah, I just find things like this absolutely fascinating.
So what I want to know is since you like to be a rebel and not turn right, so when you're in the supermarket, are you like, right, I'm going to scour the bottom shelf, the top shelves?
Yeah, or like not buy anything on an end aisle, maybe.
Nope, no end aisles for me.
But I am a bit of a bargain hunter as well. So I do look at the per kilo prices in supermarkets. I'll go around and work out like, well, that one looks cheaper, but that per kilo, that one actually is cheaper. So I'll get that one instead of that one.
Do you do the yellow stickers?
Yes.
Yeah.
always, but I'm going to talk about that some more later.
Okay, all right. Keep your powder dry for the yellow sticker. Yes. It's huge business. I met a guy who was in charge of yellow stickers at M&S, our favourite. And somebody was like, oh, that's kind of niche. And he was like, do you know how much money we take on yellow sticker products? And it was like an insane amount of money.
And also, it's going to go in the bin. Mm-hmm. I can't bear it. Like, meat going in the bin drives me insane. Yeah, that can go in the bin. It's meat going in the bin. And what about you? What's your story of the week?
Well, this week I wanted to talk about something that I've actually covered in my other podcast, The Resilient Retail Game Plan. A recent episode, I went into more detail on this, but it was about this idea of a trust recession. And I find this really fascinating. So, you were talking about how physical stores capture people's attention and keep them for as long as possible, but online stores, they have to capture people's attention and keep them for as long as possible as well, but in a different way. And what we've been seeing is that there's a lot of research showing that more people are becoming more suspicious of online stores. So some of the research, for example, Bazaar Voice, who are a user-generated content platform, they did a big piece of research and they found that around 97% of people needed to see more than one piece of information about a product before they bought it. So that one piece of information would be, you go onto the product page, it says, this is a white t-shirt, okay, add to cart, buy. What they're seeing is around nearly 40% of people need to see 4 or more pieces of information. So that would be that you see an ad that shows you a white t-shirt. You go to the website, you look at the white t-shirt on the page, but then you also will do things like Google the brand if you've not heard of it. You look at their reviews. You would look at if anyone's talking about it on social media. You'd look at the brand's own social media.
And maybe also what the returns are. So like you're already thinking about if it's not nice.
Yes.
How can I send it back?
Yes.
If I don't like it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just how legitimate does this seem? And the reason that we're getting into so they're calling it this trust recession. So less and less trust. If you're an e-commerce business, you have to assume that your customer is coming to you in a state of not really being sure if you're legitimate or not. So you have to put as much information as possible into your business and think about the customer journey from the perspective, not as a customer who's super excited to be there and they're really happy and happy to shop with you, but
maybe a repeat customer would be like that.
Yeah, maybe a repeat customer would be. But if somebody's coming across you for the first time, a lot of retailers are having to almost really rethink their journey from the ground up because of, well, a lot of the time because of things like ghost stores. So ghost stores is this really fascinating rabbit hole that I went down, which is where there are e-commerce stores that are mimicking a local store. So it would be called Claire and Kate London, for example, and it'll have a picture of 2 people and there'll be a London landmark in it. So at first glance, you might think, oh, this is a local small business boutique. And then lots of them will do things like say, oh, we're with a heavy heart, we're closing our doors. So we're running a money off, like a clearance sale. So it all at first glance looks legitimate, but these are actually stores that are set up through using AI. So they can get them up in as little as an hour. They just use a bunch of stock imagery. And it's not necessarily to say that you won't get anything if you buy from them, but it definitely won't be a local business and it will probably be coming from a warehouse in China, and it may take 6 weeks to get there. And if you don't like it, there'll be no comeback because probably by the time you've got it, the website might have been shut down and moved on.
Wow.
So there's evidence that this is a huge issue and it's growing, and there's so many of these stores out there that it's almost like playing whack-a-mole. If you try and shut them down and then another one pops up. So the customers are having to almost become, detectives and really look at all of the pieces of information that they can find. And obviously, if you're reasonably savvy, you'll very quickly see, well, hang on a minute. This says it's going to take 6 weeks to get here. These images look like AI. I'm not really sure about this. I think a lot of people have started to learn to kind of have their sensors go off and actually tell them, hang on, this isn't legitimate. But I think it's a really interesting thing for retailers themselves to think about, okay, how do I prove that I'm human? Which is not something that you often think about. Well, how do I prove this? And I think it's an example of how, for independent retailers, it can actually be a benefit that you're a human behind the business, that you can show your face, that you can show your face online, and just be aware that everything that's customer facing, you have to make sure that you have reviews, you have genuine looking reviews. It's actually okay if you have a couple of bad reviews, because all of the fake websites will just put up a whole bunch of fake 5-star reviews. There won't even be any bad reviews. So retailers sometimes worry if they get a bad review, but actually what they don't realize is that it helps with the proof that they're human. So you've got to make sure that you've got all of these trust signals. You've got, a press article about a retailer. And I think that you can almost think about it from a consumer standpoint, like, what information do you need? And a lot of people I've spoken to said, if I see an ad for something, I'm not just going to buy it. I'm going to go and I'm going to check all of these different things. And one of the things that's really interesting as well is that people believe other people much more than they believe brands. Yep. So you're seeing the growth in places like Reddit, where people will go to Reddit and they'll say, hey, I saw an ad for this company. Has anyone bought anything from them? Did you like it? What was your experience? And they're looking for these sort of anonymous users almost to give them information, but they're using that as part of their cross-referencing. So for a lot of retailers as well, they have to think about what's their Reddit strategy, because that's quite difficult. You can't wade in and be like, hey, I'm from this brand and we're great. You can't almost like pop up and be yourself in those forums.
However,
okay.
I do think Aldi do this quite well.
Oh, really?
And Ryanair, because they will jump in as the brand and just like get involved in the conversation, but in quite like a fun way.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, so Ryanair, for example, somebody will make a video about them complaining about how there's no legroom, and they say it's, I don't know, I think one of them was something like, well, it's hardly infringing on your human rights or something like that. So they're almost like playing into it.
Yeah. Or like, you didn't get luggage with your £9.99 flight.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. So it's a quite niche brands that do it well. And if you're going to do it, you have to do it like with confidence and conviction. But I just love the way they just kind of jump in on the conversation.
Yeah, that is true. So and then what you absolutely cannot do is try and do it in a subterfuge way, which we've seen some instances of brands where they almost plant somebody in Reddit to be like, hey, has anyone heard of this brand? Oh, actually, I got it and I loved it. And then it's like, wait a second.
Hang on
a minute. So it just shows that for e-commerce businesses that they really have to think about this whole cycle, and how do you actually put those kind of feelers out there, or put that information out there, so that if you put yourself in the consumer's shoes, or I'm sure people listening will think about how they shop now. Like, would you just buy from a random website? Probably not. You'd want to go and check these things. So then retailers have to put themselves in those shoes and check that all of that information that a customer would need to make that purchase is there, and that they're really establishing themselves as humans. So, for example, I interviewed Passenger Clothing, which is an outdoor clothing company. It's been on the UK fastest growth retailer list for 3 years in a row. And they have a whole strategy where they create offline events. And one of the reasons that they create the offline events is that they then have got all of this content of real humans wearing their clothes. It's very obvious that none of this is AI generated.
Yeah. And it's really hard for brands to get user generated content, or like if you ever see UGC, that's what that is. Because there's one brand that I worked with and she said, send me your pictures. And it was just this woman eating some like fish fingers on her lap. And it was like a quarter of the jumper and the majority of her fish finger dinner. And you're like, no, that's not really it. So I have seen more brands create, like, forcing their customers to create user-generated content, but they'll have a really professional photographer there at the same time, just to like capture real customers, but in a high-quality way.
Yes, oh my goodness, that must be a nightmare, especially for... Yeah, that's a good point. So with Passenger, that's a great example how they create an event, they can get that user-generated content, but they're not entirely relying just on the user.
Yes, yeah. Like they won't just expect their customers to come and photograph themselves.
Yes.
They need to take a bit of control of the situation and then use it to their benefit. Because sorry, I was just going to say that event might actually would cost them money.
Yeah.
It's not a money-making event, but long-term strategy, it is.
It's proven that they're human. It's showing the human side. It's also engaging the community, engaging their best customers. And customer advocacy is huge. And, I'm sure a lot of people listening will think, how do you trust something's really worth buying? And again, a lot of the time they're going watching videos. They're watching creators on TikTok Shop or on TikTok in general. They're looking at people using the product, talking about the product, and they're almost like trusting that more than they trust the brand.
Which is where influencers have come from.
It's
because they'll pay somebody else to say it rather than them saying it all of the time. And actually, I saw a really cool video from Tala the other day that they had pieced together loads of different videos from loads of different TikTokers. And there's like a bit of a trend where somebody will sit with their phone or like a notepad saying like 5 things that are worth your money, or like expensive shit that's worth it or something like that. And it was like creator after creator after creator that they hadn't necessarily paid to put these Tala products onto their list of 5 things. And it was just really cool. It wasn't just like, here's a video where we're featured. It was one after the other after the other after the other. It's like, how can you not believe it after that? Social proof.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a couple of episodes ago, we talked about agentic commerce and AI and how people are using AI bots to do shopping or to do research for them. And what's interesting about this whole idea of building trust is that it's actually not just humans that need that information to trust, but the AI agents that people are using to do their shopping and their shopping research, they're actually also looking for these trust indicators. So they don't want to get caught out saying, hey, buy this, and it's like a spam product. So they also are doing the same kind of research. They're looking at reviews. They're looking at how much it gets mentioned on social media. They're looking at whether or not there are press articles about the brand. They're looking for signs and evidence that the brand is legitimate. So while retailers have to do this because they have to think about the impact that it's having on consumers and the consumer journey, it's also feeding into what they need to do for the agents as well. So yeah, it's just a really fascinating one. It's certainly one that I think about when I'm making purchases, is I am thinking about just trying to get my head around what is my journey, because that's what retailers have to do. They have to put themselves into the shoes of the consumer and think about what journey they're going on. And the consumer journey is just getting more and more convoluted.
Yeah, definitely.
And apparently I heard a term that Google refer to them as the messy middle. So the messy middle is the people who come in, it's not that they land on a website and they've got a clear intent to buy. So, for example, if you go to amazon.co.uk or .com, most people, when they go to Amazon, they know that they want to buy something. They want cat litter, or they want, they
need something.
They need something. So they just go there. So that's a high intent to buy. But what they're seeing is that there's a lot of people who are doing a lot of research. That their buyer journey may sometimes be weeks or even months, where they're looking at things and they're reading reviews and depending on the price point, I think the higher the price point, the longer the journey.
Yeah.
That people can sometimes spend, as I say, weeks, months, or even years thinking about something, looking at all these different bits before they actually decide to make that purchase. So it's only getting longer and it's only getting more convoluted. So retailers have to keep thinking about keeping all of those plates spinning, which is easier said than done.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So onto the rapid fire. What was it that impressed you this week?
Well, this is where my yellow stickers are going to come back into action. It's not quite a yellow sticker, but I was in Lidl the other day and along the windowsill of Lidl, they've put out all of these crates of food.
Right.
And they are 5 kilograms of fruit and vegetables for £2.
Wow.
That are either wonky, on their way out, or just past their sell-by date, but are perfectly fine.
Yes.
And I just think that's so good that all of this food is not going to go in the bin. It gives people the opportunity to buy food at a lower cost. I just bought everything. And I was like, I couldn't believe the amount of food. Like, I actually can't remember to tell you how much was in it, but it was something like a pepper, a packet of tomatoes, and an aubergine, a lettuce, a bag of apricots and a bag of strawberries or something like that. It was like loads of food that would easily have cost like £10 even in Lidl. And I got it for £2. I was so smug. I cut everything up and put it all in the freezer. And then, as we know from a couple of episodes ago, my fridge freezer broke. So all of that smug work did kind of go to waste. But a lot of it was good. And so if you are near a Lidl, my one does it every day at 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. But maybe just like go in and check, because I've gone in there and they're all gone. I think you've got to be quick.
Yeah, the word has spread.
Yeah, definitely. Because when I went in, there was like 10 different crates on the windowsill and now they're not there. So
no one's in the know.
Yes, you've got to be there ready to get your 5 kilograms of food.
Know? How does it tell you? Is there a sign up telling you the time, or did you have
No, I asked the lady. Yeah,
right.
I just said, "Oh, do you buy these? Like, do you get first dibs of all the good stuff, and then all this like all the crap gets put on the windowsill?" And she was like, "No, like it all gets put out at 8 and 3." So I thought, noted. I'll be back. So yeah, I just think it's incredible. I love it when food does not go to waste. Yes. And what about you?
So what impressed me this week? Well, I follow a business called Iris and Olive on Instagram, and they were talking about something called Rawminster, which we were talking about the high street last week, and I think this is just such a great example of a community project. So it's Warminster in Wiltshire, and for the summer, they're doing this thing called Rawminster, which is dinosaur themed.
Okay.
So maybe I should have led with that. It's not raw, like, uncooked.
Yes. Raw.
And so they had trails around the towns. They put dinosaur prints on the ground so you knew where to go. They had dinosaur art so kids could go around and spot them. So it was all about driving footfall in the local community. They had the library got involved with dinosaur-themed books. They also had a loyalty scheme that went across different shops. So they were talking about, if you spent X amount of money across different retailers, you could get a loyalty reward like you would if you bought, 9 coffees, you get one free, but it was across different shops. So they were encouraging people to shop across places. And I just think that I love this kind of thing. I think it's just so interesting when communities get together and it doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money. I mean, this looked quite involved and it looked like there were lots of different pieces to it and they'd really thought this through and they'd really put a lot of effort in. But I often think about my local high street in Southeast London on Halloween. They had this trail, a Halloween trail, and it's absolutely mobbed with little kids. Oh. And they just go around, they just get a map and it has different shops marked on it who are taking part. And if they've got a pumpkin in the window, you go in, you get a sweet. But it's just so busy and it costs the shopkeepers, a few boxes of sweets, but it just drives people into the shops. They understand what's there. It raises the profile. People really get to know their local high street. And I just think that, this is what we need in high streets, is this kind of community initiatives. And I just thought Rawminster was a really, really great example of this. And I love to see it.
Yeah, that's so cute. Very wholesome.
Yeah. But also just genuinely works, right? Like if you've got kids and it's the summer holiday and your local town is doing something like this, you are going to take them and go do it. And that's going to drive footfall. So it's not, it doesn't have to be hugely elaborate. It just works. And it's something that only happens if a whole community comes together and does it all together.
Yeah, I love that.
So what can get in the bin for you this week?
Well, be warned, there's more fan chat coming.
Okay.
Do you remember I said I loved my TikTok fans?
Yes.
And I do run hot. And I thought, okay, if I'm somebody that really loves being cooled down, I'm going to invest in a shark chill pill.
Right.
Don't buy it. First of all, if you are going to buy it, get it on TikTok Shop because it is cheaper than buying it direct.
Really?
So it still comes direct from Shark, but it's like 20 quid cheaper. But it just didn't
blow you away, literally.
Didn't blow me away. So there's 3 attachments. One is the fan, which is so loud that you probably can't have it on indoors, honestly. And the air that comes out of it isn't that cold compared to the TikTok fan. Next one is some sort of metal plate that you can put on your skin, but it's like the size of a I don't know, a bit bigger than a 10p. So you think, what's the point? Like, you're sort of like dabbing it on your skin. Pointless. Next. Then the third attachment is very good because that's the mist attachment and it blasts out like freezing cold mist.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
Yes.
But I don't think it's worth £100 to be blasted with cold mist. And it's also quite heavy as well compared to the TikTok fan. And all of these little attachments, there's no bag for all of these attachments.
Right.
So you've kind of just got to chuck it all in your bag and hope that it doesn't break. And it's quite flimsy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a no from me for the Shark Chill pill, I'm afraid. Like, if you've been influenced, don't believe the hype. Just get a normal fan.
You've got a new career as a de-influencer now.
Yeah. Because the TikTok fan, it's very powerful, but much quieter. And the air that comes out is really cold, which is what you want, right?
Yeah.
You don't want warm air being blasted. It's disgusting.
And presumably much cheaper.
Yeah. It was like £15 or something. And the battery's better.
Oh.
Yeah. All of it can go in the bin.
A red flag.
Yes.
A sea of red flags.
Yeah. I mean, it's my own fault for spending £100 on a portable fan, but I wanted to see what all the hype was about. Sometimes you do think if it's that expensive, it's got to be good.
Yeah, reassuringly expensive.
Yeah, and normally I'm not that person, but for this, because I do value that of running hot, I thought, okay, I'm going to invest in it because it's going to make my life different. No.
Do you think the influencers were getting a kickback? Is that why?
I would say so.
Yeah.
Or de-influence. And what can get in the bin for you?
Well, I was thinking about this one this week and I decided that I was going to nominate hay fever. Because I was thinking about what do I spend money on or what have I spent money on over time? And for sure, over the years, I have spent, I don't even know how much money I've spent on hay fever and hay fever remedies.
Yes.
So I also think I'm an absolute sucker for any, pain point marketing when they say, oh, suffer from hay fever. And I'm just like, yes, I'll just buy it. So I've tried the, balm that you put around your nose. I bought these hay fever face wipes, which I still don't really understand.
I think they're baby wipes.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But actually maybe slightly more alcohol-y. So actually really bad for your skin.
Yeah.
And I have tried so many different things. The only thing, and I'm in peak hay fever season right now, the only thing that really works for me is last year I got the okay from the doctor to take 2 antihistamines a day.
Yeah.
One in the morning, one in the evening. I have a hay fever eye drops. I have saline nasal spray it's just like a whole elaborate thing. But it does pretty much keep it under control. But I was like, the amount of time and effort I've devoted in my life and remedies I've purchased for hay fever, and basically
nothing works.
It's just that can
Drop
definitely get in the
yourself
bin.
up and stay at home.
Apparently you're supposed to wash your hair every night before bed because
or sleep in a bonnet.
Sleep in a bonnet. Okay,
yes.
All right. Maybe I need to add that to my
anyone that has curly hair specifically or not hair that gets very knotty, if you're not sleeping in a bonnet, you're missing out. It is a game changer. I used to have to wash my hair like every other day because it would just look so terrible. Now, once a week.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I have a vision of a Jane Austen bonnet, but
yeah, it's got to be satin.
Okay. A satin bonnet.
And can you explain why as well?
Oh, because your hair traps a lot of the reason that you get hay fever is from the pollen getting trapped in your hair. Yeah. That you then wipe all over your pillow.
Then rub your face all over your
pillow. And then rub your face all over your pillow. And then that's why people often suffer from hay fever a lot at night, apparently. So
it would make sense because that's where the wipes come in, is because it's all stuck on your eyelashes. Yeah. So even if you just put like a freezer, or baby wipes in the freezer or something, it's just like relief. But whatever you do, don't rub your eyes because it makes it
and don't drink
100
alcohol.
times worse. Yeah, because that is histamine, isn't it?
Yeah.
And kombucha apparently.
Oh, well, luckily I hate kombucha. So.
That can also go in the
bin. And what are you shopping for this week?
I'm still on the lookout for a light summer jacket because I tried to buy that. I know we're coming towards the end of the season. I tried buying that butter yellow jacket and it was actually cream, not yellow. It wasn't meant to be, but I cannot wear blazers. I look so ridiculous in a blazer. And I actually did this whole thing online called your Kibby body type.
Oh yes,
do you remember
we did that on the train?
And I am completely rotund, essentially. literally where I have no angles on my body. Everything is round, everything is curved, even my hair is curly. So I was like, that is why I look so stupid in a blazer, because like my shoulders are sloped and stuff. So it just didn't suit me. And so then what do you wear in the summer that is like a light bomber jacket? Please, somebody tell me. Well, if you've got denim on the bottom.
Double denim.
Yeah, and then it's like, can you wear, like, I do like double.
You can't wear.
What is it, a Canadian tuxedo as a double denim?
With your jorts.
Yes, yeah, which I also feel like I don't like them anymore. So yeah, and also denim's not smart. So I've got a casual summer jacket, but not smart. Either lace or suede, I feel like I need.
Isn't suede a bit hot?
If it's like not lined, I think it might be fine. Okay. But yeah, if you see anything in my specific colour palette that I'm very strict about, please send it my way, because I can just wear it next year. Yeah.
So you think more bomber style?
More bomber, round.
Right.
Curved,
you see, I think I look a bit like a Teletubby in a bomber jacket.
But you look good in a blazer.
I like a blazer.
Yeah. And what about you? What are you on the lookout for?
Well, I think I might want a couple more baseball caps, because I've actually been getting into wearing baseball caps this summer to stop my hair turning to effectively straw in the sun.
Yeah.
And I think I'm getting quite into it. But do you think that baseball caps are just summer wear, or do you think they're all year round?
No, all year round. Okay. Definitely. Yeah, because you can wear them with a hoodie. That would look nice. Not convinced. A cool hoodie, not like a gym hoodie. A smart hoodie. Because I guess you've got to have like the contrast between the cap, which is casual, and then something that is more like elevated, so that you don't literally just look like you're going to train for the Olympics.
So I'm thinking maybe I need a couple in more of a slightly autumnal colour palette. So maybe like a navy, or maybe like a dark green or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking.
Recommend Rock On Ruby, because they do some bespoke illustrated caps where you can like choose what you want it to say, choose the font, choose the colour. But they've got some really like funny suggestions on there as well. And they just always make these funny videos about how it's so fun to work there, because a lot of them are in jokes and they just have no idea like what all of these caps mean.
I think I saw one where they posted, an influencer had posted that they had a hat that said only here for the Aperol spritz or something like that, and their 2-year-old child insisted on wearing it to nursery.
And they were like, okay,
so now my child is wearing a hat that says only here for the Aperol spritz.
Although when I was younger, my dad used to he used to own a nightclub, basically. It's really random. And so he'd get given all this free merch, and he got given this Smirnoff Ice vodka record bag, and I begged him to wear it to school. My mum was like, you can't have a vodka school bag. Lo and behold, I won, and I did take it to school. And
how old were you?
Maybe like 11. But in that you just remember that feeling of thinking you were so cool when clearly you just looked like an idiot. I just went in there like probably loads of 11-year-olds don't even know what Smirnoff is. But I
bet you look cool.
I'm sure I looked so iconic with my 11-year-old vodka school
I always
bag.
think about the time that someone said that they had a teenage son, and he insisted on wearing this hat that said porn star, and she absolutely hated it, and she kept saying that's really inappropriate, you can't wear it. And he was like, oh, stop being so boring. So she bought the same one. And she started wearing it.
That's good.
And then he was like, okay, all right, I give up now.
I remember going to Covent Garden with our friends, and there was a T-shirt and it had 2 handprints across the chest, and it said porn star in training. And my friend was so desperate to buy it that she had to ring her mum and ask her if she was allowed to buy it.
That would be a hard no.
Hard no. I can't remember it. I feel like she ended up buying it, but maybe she just wore it when like tucked in her bag. You know, you wear one thing out the house, then you get changed. It was one of them.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you've escaped well with your daughter, I think. But yeah, that's everything.
Well, thank you so much for listening and watching. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Why not drop us an email, info@theshoppingforecast.co.uk, and tell us what you're shopping for, what you're obsessed with at the moment, and what can get in the bin.
Or DM us on Instagram @theshoppingforecast, because we love to read all of your messages and see who's listening.
And don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe, depending on where you listen or watch, and you'll be the first to know about each new episode.
You can also leave a rating or a review if you have enjoyed listening. We only accept 5 stars only.
Fake ones, preferably.
So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.